Good morning. Welcome back to the Countdown to Ironman Lake Placid video series. My name is Joe from Endurance Mentors. We are 16 weeks out from the race, 4 months to go. Today, we're going to be finishing up our sub-series on nutrition, and we're going to be talking about specifically fueling your training and just some kind of high-level tips to guide you through how and how much to fuel your training. But I wanted to actually start with the rumor mill. And I'm noticing that there is some chatter out there about the on-course nutrition potentially changing at Ironman races this year. Traditionally, it's been Gatorade Endurance served at these races, certainly for the last long time now, many years. And I'm linked here to a blog post on Slow Twitch, which I'll put in the description so you can follow it yourself. But it looks like there might be some different carbohydrate electrolyte sources being provided during our race this year. There has been no official announcement. This is just a rumor at this point, but I thought it was worth bringing up because I think it ties very nicely into your training, your fueling strategy when training, because of course that ties directly into your fueling strategy on race day. Um, so right now it looks like Mortal Hydration from thefeed.com will likely, or I'm sorry, could be the nutrition that is served on race day instead of Gatorade Endurance. I did take a look at the Ironman website as well, and I do not see Gatorade as a featured partner. So I think this is a possibility that there's going to be a change here. And that ties into how we approach fueling during training, because one of the things that has just seemed very obvious to me over the years is, even though there's a lot of different ways to approach your fueling strategy during your training, lots of different products to use out there, it has always really made sense to me to you might as well fuel with during training what you're going to be using on race day, right? So you've already essentially paid for this fueling strategy on race day. I think it does make sense to incorporate that into your training if you're trying to figure out what works for you still, or maybe haven't found the right the right product at this point. So now, especially, we hear that there's been a change. I think this is, especially if it goes to something like mortal hydration, which we are all not too familiar with. This is actually, I think, going to be really important, because now it's like, Gatorade Endurance is something that's been around for a long time. Certainly, Gatorade's been around forever. If we're going to a new hydration and electrolyte carbohydrate source on the race course, we should really all be trying that out ahead of time. So let's keep an eye on the rumor mill. Let's help each other out here. I'll keep an eye on the Ironman website. Let's look for maybe a more official announcement about this. But I think there's a good chance that this is coming down the pipeline. And the other way we can probably tell is watching some of the races this weekend, a big kind of Ironman kickoff weekend. If they're not serving Gatorade Endurance, I think that's a pretty good tell that our hydration on race day and will be different, and thus we should probably start to adjust some of our training to see how we do with mortal hydration. All right, when we're talking about fueling our training, or obviously we're fueling our training in order to fuel our race day, it's really the same thing. But what we're really talking about here is, how do we figure out what works best for us as individual athletes? The topic of fueling your training is an incredibly individual pursuit. Okay, no two people are alike. Everyone's body absorbs calories and carbohydrates differently. There are many different products out there. Go ahead and try them. There's a lot of really interesting data about what works best, for some people, versus others. And I really think it just comes down to um, trial and error, and figuring out what works best for you as an athlete. With that said, though, there are some basic guidelines that, if you're new to endurance athletics, there's some basic guidelines that you can use as maybe a framework as you go through the rest of your training cycle. Again, we're 16 weeks out. We have big workouts. we have to fuel all of these in order to be ready to go for the following day at this point. So we want to be thoughtful about our fueling strategy. The first place I would start is to we should start kind of knowing where we want to go. Okay. So generally speaking, the rule of thumb in an Ironman, okay, is you want to be taking in 90 grams of carbohydrates per hour that you're out there. Okay. So that's by no means a hard and fast number, but I think that's a very reasonable place to kind of have in your mind about like, okay, I need to try to target that. By race day, I need to be able to take in about 90 grams of carbs per hour. And then the fueling source can alter, right? And you want to figure out what works best for you in that regard as well, between liquids, solids, etc. But one thing that is true about 90 grams of carbohydrates, for all of us, that ends up being actually a lot of intake. And you have to be able to take all of this in while you're, you're executing these long training workouts, whether they be bike rides or running at this point. And you need to be able to feel comfortable doing that, right? Avoid gut issues, etc. If you are able to take in 90 grams of carbohydrates per hour, you can do that in a way that sits well with your body. Your body can absorb it and really take it on, and you can turn that into, that's going to be a key part of the equation in a great performance for you. So this is something we should be thinking about right now. Now, what's a good place to start is to figure out where you are right now. We're 4 months out, right? Think about like, all right, I had a long ride last weekend. Maybe I had a 3-hour ride. How many calories did I take in per hour on that ride? Or if you don't necessarily know that, go into this weekend's ride thinking, how much am I taking in? Just get yourself a baseline, okay? If maybe you're taking in only 30 grams of carbohydrates per hour, okay, you know now that you have to start incrementally increasing this. You've probably heard the term training your gut. This is like the most true thing that I've ever learned in endurance sports. This is real. You really have to have a strategy, just like you have a swim, bike, run training strategy. You 100% need to have a training your gut strategy as well. And the more thoughtful about it that you can be during your training, believe me, the better off you're going to be on race day when you can just easily take in those calories and make sure that they're sitting well with you so you don't run into any GI issues, or worse, the other way, you end up bonking. So think about a strategy to get yourself from where you are right now to maybe up to that, general rule of thumb, 90 grams of carbohydrates per hour. All right. Try to implement that over time. See how that goes. One caveat that I will say is that especially if you're working out outside right now, and I'll say this, I'm in Connecticut. We're just starting to get back outside. So, the weather is still pretty cool. The sweat rates are nowhere near as high as they're going to be in late July when when we're in the Ironman. So it's okay if you're not, taking in as many liquids right now as you should be. You're still going to get a lot out of your workouts. But again, have that target in mind, knowing that like, okay, maybe practice it for 1 hour. Say like, I'm going to go out on my long ride. I'm going to practice taking in 90 grams of carbohydrates this hour, or I'm going to take in 60 and see how that feels. There are also some supplements out there, some fueling sources, excuse me, that actually play with the sugar mixtures that allow you to go even higher than that 90 per hour. But that 90 per hour is a lot of calories anyway. And that is, I think, at least a very good target for yourself to shoot for as you're fueling your training and as we move forward. I will also say that this is definitely not easy. I have done, this is going to be my 7th Ironman and a whole bunch of kind of marathon distance running before that. And I'll be honest, I don't actually think I've ever gotten my fueling during my race day perfectly. I don't think I've ever had a perfect fueling day in a race, which means that I probably haven't paid close enough attention to it during my training. So this is by no means like an exact science, okay? Figure out what works for you, work towards it, and you'll be much better off just being thoughtful throughout the process and trying to kind of hit those targets. At the very least, you'll know what doesn't work for you when you get to race day, And that can be as beneficial as knowing what does work for you. Okay. All right, great. So we're 16 weeks out. Next week, actually, videos for the next 2 weeks are going to be focused actually on penalties. So we're going back on course. Next week, we'll be talking about the different types of penalties that we can get out there. And then the following week, we're going to be talking about specifically drafting penalties on the bike, which are very subjective on both sides. And I'd like to just provide some tips on, frankly, how to avoid them because it's a very dynamic situation and you can find yourself in tough spots. So we'll talk about the different types of penalties next week. 2 weeks, we'll talk about more specifically drafting penalties, and we will go from there. Okay, great. Since this is such an individual topic, please feel free to leave in the comments if there is anything that you can contribute to this conversation when it comes to fueling your training or fueling race day. Let's keep an eye on the different forums on the Ironman website and let's see what fueling source we're actually going to be using on race day. And certainly if there's a change to something you haven't used before, I would definitely make sure that you're practicing it ahead of time. Thanks all. Hope you have a great week.